Hello there. What is going on, everybody? Today we're talking about Star Wars Legion and proxies, or less proxies, but rather miniature substitutions. Although the conversation that we're going to have is a little bit about both, but it's specifically about miniature substitutions. Can you swap out miniatures for the model that you're using, for the character that you're using, with a different model that represents the same person, same character? It's a question that's been asked, and it's something that happens. I personally don't think it's a big deal, but we're going to talk about some of the finer implications as it applies to these to this question, and some ways that it's been kind of brought up recently. If you guys are new here to the channel, we talk a lot about Star Wars games, Star Wars tabletop games, and we are doing a big giveaway. We're doing 12 Days of Life Day throughout December. We're going to be giving away doing giveaways 12 times. It's going to be to subscribers who have left a comment on this or one of my videos. It's as simple as that. You just got to click that subscribe button and let me know some of your thoughts down in the comments. Let me know if you have ever swapped out a model for a different model before, and proxied a different model as well. It's a fun thing to do from time to time. We're going to talk about the realistic answer to can you do this, as well as some of the tournament answers as well, and why those rules exist. But yes, so I'd love to have you guys stick around, and we're going to be giving. But the 12 Days of Life Day will also will be some of those giveaways that go straight to patrons. So if you're interested in supporting the channel, you hop on to Patreon. The links are in the video description below. So a question recently came up, somebody wanting to run Commander Luke Skywalker in Star Wars Legion asked, "Hey, can I use Jedi Luke instead? I really don't like the Commander Luke sculpt. I don't really like the Commander Luke. I like the Return of the Jedi Luke more." This may be a question that you've had asked, or maybe something similar to this question. Can I run maybe a proxy? Can I run one of my own commanders? Can I make a custom miniature of myself and put myself in the game and all of those things? And the long and the short of it is, as long as your opponent's okay with it, then it's fine. That's usually how it goes. It's really not a big deal. It's really not a big deal to swap out Jedi Luke for Commander Luke. One of those reasons why it's not a big deal, of course, it does get deeper than this, because there's an answer to why not to do it as well. But we're going to talk about why you should and why you can and why it's a cool thing to do first. But yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons it's not a big deal is because you can only have one Luke Skywalker. And if I've got Jedi Luke out there and I'm running Commander Luke in my list, it's presumed that you are familiar with my list. It's presumed that you know I'm running Luke Skywalker, and that if you see Jedi Luke, he's easily identifiable as the one and only Luke Skywalker on the battlefield that I am running. Of course, there is some cases where it might be slightly problematic. Your opponent might have a problem with it. And so if they do, of course, you want to hear them out and comply. But there's a lot of other use cases and other things that you might swap out. I know you had proxies of like the Star Wars Rebels Ghost crew, and I've swapped them out for a unit of Rebel troopers before. And I've done things like that. I've swapped out Spaceballs for stormtroopers, from the amazing movie Spaceballs. So you can definitely always make proxies and swaps. It's a fun thing to do. Some companies encourage it. Some companies are fine with it. Some companies are against it. And it depends on where you're playing and who you're playing in front of and what the visibility is on the game that you're playing. If you're playing in a world championship, for example, you're not going to be able to do that. But of course, if you are playing at home, or you're playing even in a lot of tournaments, even some slightly larger tournaments, as long as your table isn't streaming, a lot of times it's okay to do all kinds of stuff. There are rules about this stuff, but one of the important things, the most important rule of thumb, is that your opponent, it's clear to your opponent what miniature represents what unit. That's the most important thing in all games, not just Legion, but specifically in Legion. This could be problematic if your opponent is also running, maybe he's running Jedi Luke and you want to put Jedi Luke in for yours, and maybe both of your characters are painted like exactly the same, and maybe it becomes hard to tell whose is whose. That might be a good reason to say, hey, use the correct miniature, please, so this way we don't get confused as to whose is whose and what's where, and so on and so forth. That could be a good reason. Also be other good reasons. Maybe you have your character painted a little bit weird. An easier example of this might be if you had stormtroopers and your stormtroopers were painted black. But maybe you just had one unit of stormtroopers that were painted black. Like maybe some were painted white, some were painted black, and then you had like some death troopers that are also painted black, and then it could be confusing because again, a lot of Imperial troopers look very similar. Not all of them, but a lot of them look very, very similar. And so if you were to paint your stormtroopers in misleading ways, your opponent could have a problem with that. Granted, there aren't usually, heavy restrictions on and cracking down on paint schemes if you're not doing other modifications. But if you do it in a way that's intentionally misleading, it's kind of a douchebag move. Like, don't do that to intentionally try to screw with your opponent. Nobody wants to. Well, it's not cool to try to win with aha, I got you, I tricked you because you thought those were only stormtroopers, but they were actually dark troopers that were painted white. Like that's a really low class way to play. And I'm sure none of you do that, hopefully. But it can also be something worth noting that there are a lot of different versions of Luke Skywalker. For example, in addition to the core set, we got Jedi Operative Luke. We had a special Luke that was from the recent convention exclusive, the diorama kit. There's of course the Hoth Luke, Commander Luke version, and even more versions of Luke to come. So there's going to be a lot of different versions of Luke Skywalker. So I don't think it'll be a problem to pick and choose which version of Luke Skywalker you're running. For example, once all of the new stuff comes out. Of course, this is the current art on the Luke Skywalker card, and of course, this is Luke Skywalker Commander. And currently, the only versions of Luke Skywalker Commander that would be legal to run in like a very official Worlds level game would be the Hoth Luke, because that is an official model that represents Luke Skywalker Commander, or the Bespin Luke, which was the original Luke Skywalker Commander Luke. But there is a version of Luke Skywalker Commander that is coming out for this version, whereas the Jedi versions of Luke represent the operative version. Generally, I don't think most opponents would have a problem. If you're playing in a tournament, of course, it is going to be up to the TO's discretion on what you can and cannot run, and they will a lot of times will say, as long as your opponent has no problem with it, it's cool. That's generally how it's going to go. It's much less of an issue with certain other characters like Darth Vader, where, well, he's wearing the exact same outfit everywhere, even though the pose is slightly different. There are currently 3 versions of Darth Vader Commander and only 1 operative, but there will eventually be additional sculpts of Darth Vader coming as well. It doesn't usually seem like that big of a deal. But what does the actual tournament rules say? Does it say that that you can't do this ever? Well, it says something kind of like that. There are a lot of miniatures rules in the official rules document, which you can get over at atomicmassgames.com. But I want to direct your attention to bullet point number 3. By the way, in this list, there are more than 3 bullet points. I just cropped it at 3. It does say that your miniature must be easily identifiable as the version of the unit it represents. Identifiable, not identifiable. I mean, yes, identifiable, not identify. No, I can't say what I just said. Wow. This is what happens when you get to be old. You start to lose your mind when you use the dark side of the Force. Yoda looked like a normal human before he started using the Force. Did you know that? So it must be identifiable as the version of the unit it represents. Not just the unit, but the version. This is actually an issue when it comes to Luke Skywalker, because there have been some tournament players, especially if you're a very competitive player, and this is an important thing, because if your opponent says, actually, dude, I would rather you, if you're running Commander Luke, I would request that you run Commander Luke and not Jedi Luke. They're not necessarily doing that just to mess with you. There is a real reason for them to do that, beyond just the fact that the letter of the law states that that must happen. For some people who play very competitively, there can be a sort of reflex or sort of instinctual ways to handle board setups and board scenarios. And these two characters play very, very differently. Jedi Luke having disengage, Jedi Luke, having certain abilities that Commander Luke doesn't have, and vice versa. And so the ways that your opponent might react to the board state at any given point in time could potentially, be based on the history of their games, especially if they play a lot of competitive games. And and even the muscle memory, so to speak, of how they look at some of these miniatures. And I think this is an interesting thing that I didn't initially think of. There was a recent discussion on Reddit that I took part in where a couple of really well thought out responses kind of shed some light on this for me, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Whereas I am somebody who plays a little bit more casually, although I do play in tournaments from time to time, I personally don't have that muscle memory. So I usually am absolutely fine if you want to swap something out, as long as it's clear what's what. I have run into players who would have like black painted stormtroopers and white painted death troopers and stuff like that, which I thought was a little confusing, but I don't play that competitively, that I don't necessarily mind the confusion as long as we're both having fun, because I tend to prefer to adhere to the rule of cool. But if I were more competitive and I were taking a game very, very seriously and I needed to absolutely play my best, I could see something like that causing me to potentially make a mistake, especially if it's in a multi-day tournament, or maybe game 3 of the day and I'm already starting to get tired. I've been on my feet all day. I've been stressed. I've been thinking really, really heavily. Gears have been turning. And the longer the day goes on, I mean, especially imagine you're playing your 4th game in a day or something like that, and you're tired, you're exhausted, your opponent's tired, they're exhausted, and I see Jedi Luke move into position, and he's got disengaged, and my one guy isn't going to be enough. I need to put somebody else there, and I realize, wait a second, I just did that, but he doesn't have disengaged because that's Commander Luke. I made a mistake. That sort of thing can happen. So in a competitive environment, it would not be unreasonable for somebody to ask you to use the correct miniature. So what you should do, my suggestion, if you do want to run an alternate miniature for anyone, have the actual miniature available. Have it available to play. If it's gonna be more fun for you to run the Jedi version, or maybe you're putting yourself in, or what have you, or you want to run Kanan Jarrus in place of Luke Skywalker because you're doing that whole thing. Have the real miniatures available. Bring them with you. Don't make your opponent feel bad if they request you to use the actual. Don't be like, fine, if you want to be that guy. You shouldn't be that guy by making them feel bad about it. Ask and be willing to accept whatever they say to you. Of course, you also have to clear it with a TO first, but usually a TO is going to be fine with it as long as you're not trying to do anything egregious, and that does apply to paint job. Like if they do happen to release a Kanan Jarrus, and you were to paint your Luke just to look like Kanan Jarrus, and you painted your Kanan Jarrus just to look like Luke, to deliberately confuse people, that could be problematic too, right? Usually they make the sculpts a little bit more unique than that, but if we go back to things like Darth Vader, again, I don't anticipate them creating anybody else that looks just like Darth Vader. But if you were to mod like a helmet onto an Inquisitor and then paint it all up to look like Darth Vader, I could see maybe, some things like that. See, again, make it clear, follow the rules, and be cool to your opponent. Be excellent to each other. It's a great way to proceed. That's going to do it for this video. Let me know some of your thoughts down in the comments below. And I want to thank you guys for watching. And big thanks to my patrons. You guys are out of this world and help make this whole channel possible. Thank you so much for your continued support. I will talk to you later. May the Force be with you. Live long and prosper. Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes. So say we all. You can't take the sky from me. I eat Chihuahua. And always wash your socks.